and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 44 of the podcast. I'm Debbie Levitt from Delta CX, and this is 10 traits UX practitioners must have. And I'm going to start by going through some stuff that's in my book where I had 8 traits and a couple of more that I've thought of since then that I wanted to tack on. And then about halfway through, or maybe a little sooner, we will be joined by a secret special guest. So I'm going to start by reminding everybody, no one can see you, special guest, only I can right now. Remind everybody to subscribe. Oh, it's the wrong side. Subscribe on YouTube. Let's see. Subscribe on YouTube at the Delta CX channel. It's so much of a better stream than LinkedIn is. Costs you nothing, and it's good for your heart. So it's better than eating an apple, I hear. So I wanted to remind everybody that we are live on LinkedIn and on YouTube. And so if you have any questions, I'll be watching my combined chat to see what people are saying. So let me know. So I'm going to jump right in with an excerpt from my book and a couple of additional comments I'd like to make as I go. And then, of course, we'll take some thoughts and questions. So for those of you who have my book, this is the subchapter, The 8 Traits Great CX Practitioners Have. And Sneha says, hi. Hi, Sneha. Every CX action hero has talents, abilities, and skills that make them amazing at their job and a perfect fit for CX work. Some of these you're born with, some of them you can learn over time, and, well, something else. Delta CX, my universe, believes that most of the qualities required to do great CX work are natural talents that you're born with or without. Training can give you more technique and foundational knowledge, but you still might lack the talent to do CX work well or at an expert level. So I say this not to judge people. This is not in the book. So I say this not to judge people and not to point fingers, but just to give people a moment of self-assessment. When I hear about these traits and why I need them, might I have them? If I don't have them, can I develop them? Can I improve them? So this is really more about self-awareness and self-assessment rather than judging everybody or shutting a gate on you guys if you feel like you don't have these now or yet. It's again, a moment of self-awareness. So number one trait that I suggest a UX practitioner must have is empathy, but I mean real empathy, not I'm thinking about the customer. That's thinking. That's intellectualizing. That's not empathy. Great practitioners must be able to see our customers' worlds as the customers see them, through their reality, whatever their reality is. Empathy is vital to CX work because we need to have a total understanding and appreciation of what users and customers' real experiences are and avoid our own biases, guesses, and assumptions. Excuse me, propolis time. Not sponsored by Propolis. So empathy is really important to UX, and it's the ability. Sure, we want to be able to feel what other people feel, but in this case, it's more of the cognitive empathy of being able to see people's perspectives and realities through their eyes without us coloring it or making guessing and assumptions. Trait number 2, an uncanny ability to predict multiple possible outcomes. So quickly, I find that people who aren't as strong in UX tend to see one thing. They go, well, if we did this and if we did this, this would happen. That could happen, but so could 400 other things. So most non-CX workers focus on what if everything went right, known as the happy path, and often don't look at other possible outcomes. But we must design our product, services, and experiences for the happy path as well as other possibilities. Once upon a time, an engineering lead wanted to overrule my work and design, and he wanted to make his own checkout method because he thought it would be cleaner. And I pointed out his idea wasn't an intuitive process. I predicted if people couldn't figure this out when they were in our store using this in-app checkout, they would think they paid, but then won't have completed the checkout. They would then leave the store with unpaid merchandise, turning customers into accidental shoplifters. Teammates told me I was being hysterical and overdramatic, and they built it the way they wanted it. When it was piloted in a real store, guess what? Some people couldn't figure out the checkout, thought they had paid, and started leaving with unpaid merchandise. Predicting possible outcomes is an important trait in a great CX and UX worker. We have to see all of these possible outcomes, and not because we're hysterical, overdramatic, or a conspiracy theorist, but because these are possible outcomes and they have to be designed for. Some might be super edge cases, but some might be more common, so they must be considered. And I find that is just like a natural talent. I don't know how to make someone better at predicting multiple possible outcomes. I don't have human children, but I hear that people who have human children wish their teenagers were better at predicting multiple possible outcomes. And wouldn't their teenagers make some better decisions if they could? So, good luck there. Trait number 3 that UX practitioners must have is problem solving. Now, of course, there's also problem finding. Can you even determine what is the right problem? But that, of course, comes with talents and skills, but also great research. So I'm just focusing on the traits you've got to have to succeed kind of anywhere in the CX UX spectrum, and that's problem solving. I would even want a visual designer to be a problem solver because I want you to be imagining good usability and good accessibility. So, all aspects of CX, including research, analysis, architecture, and design, involve serious problem finding and problem solving. Our nature is to be the workers who take on, understand, and conquer product, service, and experience challenges, questions, and executions. So, kind of the opposite of this is when we accidentally or on purpose are order takers, where instead of being critical thinkers and problem solvers, we're like, just tell me what to do, I'll do it. There goes your power for the rest of that job. Trait number 4, which is a bit of a trait, a bit of a skill, is architecture. So much of CX has parallels to physical architecture, even when we're talking about digital interfaces and software. How will the space on the screen be used? How will people move through a step-by-step process? How can we craft the navigation so the site or app is easy to move around? How do people recover from a mistake or an error message? A CX architect has to understand the customers who will use this product to create the best design. The service architect must imagine people navigating through space and time to accomplish the physical tasks. Wireframes and prototypes are the blueprints that other teammates will follow. But like a building architect, before we've drawn those up, we've done a huge amount of pre-work. The building architect might look at urban planning studies, zoning, talk to stakeholders, learn more about the type of people who will live or work in this building, work with structural engineers on what will make the building most sound, etc. And same for us. We can certainly have collaborators, but remember there's a mountain of things that we do before we draw the blueprints. And that has to do with our senses of architecture. And again, this is live. If you have comments or questions as I go through these traits or you disagree, let's see it in the comments or the chat. I only see hello so far. Trait number 5, and I would say this is a little bit more of knowledge and skill rather than a trait you might be born with, and that is principles of cognitive psychology. Probably not born with that, but some people are naturally better with psychology than others. Principles of cognitive psychology are at the core of CX. We're interested in topics including psychology of language. How do people parse information? Attention spans, where people miss or ignore something in the experience, human needs and motivations. What will be easy for people to learn or remember? Where can we make someone change or do something they wouldn't normally do? And Gestalt principles of perception. CX is creative, but also highly scientific and rooted in human behavior and cognition. So, of course, these are things you can learn. You can learn about cognitive psychology and principles of human perception and behavior. But again, like any other topic, some people take to it better than others. So this is something you want to be checking in yourself to see how you're doing or if there's room to improve and grow. Number 6, and hear me out on this one, a trait that I believe all successful UX practitioners should have is the ability to manipulate people. This sounds bad, but it's an important ability to have and can certainly be used for good. CX architecture, in its very nature, requires some manipulation since you're helping a customer down a path where they will want or need to take an action or complete a task. So even pushing someone in the right direction could be seen as a manipulation. Our processes and layouts must be persuasive and compelling, which again could be manipulation. Use your powers for good and keep strong ethics at the center. So, again, great to see some more people joining in on YouTube and LinkedIn. This is the 10 traits every UX practitioner must have. I'm coming up to number 7, and I'm happy to hear your comments and questions as I go. Number 7 is something that I believe some people are a little bit born with, and something you can learn and improve. So, if you feel like you're not good at this yet, and I find most UX juniors are not good at this yet, that doesn't mean you'll never make it in this business. It just means you're aware of an area where you need to improve. And that is number 7, lawyer like skills. These are soft skills that are important for presentations, discussions, and times when you need to be a strong advocate for customer needs and the value in our products and services. We must know when to pick our battles and when a compromise can be worked out without a fight. Sometimes we'll have to walk away, and sometimes we shouldn't back down easily. It takes experience to find that balance. So, again, I feel an important trait to long term success in working in CX and UX is going to be a little bit of thinking and acting like a lawyer. And I've had people over the years say to me, "Man, sometimes talking to you feels like talking to a lawyer." And my thought is, thank you. That hasn't always made me popular with the people I've dated. But, it's still an important trait to have to bring to work, even if you don't bring it home, because we need to be the type of advocate that a lawyer is for their client and stand up for the people who aren't there to stand up for themselves. And number 8 on my original list of 8, then I've got 2 more bonus ones and then a surprise special guest waiting in the wings. Number 8 is powers of observation. Again, that's something I find that people are tend to be born with but can improve over time a little bit if they're aware that they're not as strong with it. And again, this is something I think people wish their teenagers and college age students were much better at. Powers of observation, I see it as a little bit of cognitive psychology, a little bit of curiosity, a little bit of possible outcomes, combined with a great ability to read people and read situations. So, this is a bit of a compound one. It's a little bit complex, but I believe that for great powers of observation, which would definitely be important if you're going to be a researcher and do any sort of observational studies or interviewing, you really need to be able to read people and see what's going on for them, understand what they're feeling no matter what words they're using, understand what they're thinking no matter what their face shows. It's really quite complex. So, powers of observation is deep and complex, but something I hope people already have or will work on improving. So, let's see, just checking if there's anything else in my book I want to mention. No, I think that's it. So, I'm going to close this window. And I want to talk quickly about the other 2 that have kind of popped up in my world over and over since writing the book last year. And those are number 1, low ego and humility. So let's make that number 9. Low ego and humility. And I do talk in a number of areas in my book about being low ego. So I guess I feel like it didn't need to be on that list because it was on nearly every other page in my book. I talk about being a low ego action hero. Um, But the more that I interact with people on LinkedIn and the more I do these podcasts and hear about people's experiences, I think we just have to come out and say it that people who are more egotistical, and certainly a few days ago we talked about narcissists, that's going to be off the charts, but people who tend to be more egotistical are going to struggle in UX. Now, what do I mean by egotistical? Because nobody wants to be like, oh, yeah, she's talking about me. I'm egotistical. Usually if you're egotistical, you're absolutely sure you're not. So, what are some things that might help us recognize this? Can you ever recognize in yourself a need to be right over anything else? I have to win this argument. Sometimes we've all felt like this, but hopefully we snapped ourselves out of it. I just have to win this argument. And that's not good for UX. That's good for ego. It's good for us feeling like we won or we defeated that person. But in UX, we can't do that. We have to be low ego and we have to remain humble. Part of humility is the respect for those senior to us. I have 25 years of experience, but I pray at the feet of the people who have equal experience to me, more experience than I have, and in some cases less experience than I have. I'm a huge fan of Don Norman. I'm a huge fan of Larry Marine. I'm a bit of a fan of Darren Hood. There's people out there who I'm inspired by, and and sometimes I'm a little bit like, oh wow, look at these people. I've got to keep learning from them. Um, so, no matter where you think you are, there's always someone else you can learn from. And sometimes it's not even the people in our industry, it could be people from other industries or other roles at our company. And so, don't just say, oh, UX seniors, oh, but F those engineers. No way. I'm wearing my DevOps Days shirt today. You can't see it, and I'm not standing up. But basically, um, because I just ate a lot of ice cream. But I've been going to DevOps conferences, and there's so much to learn from engineers and DevOps, and I so admire those people. Partially because I just don't know much about their world, and so everything's like amazing and sparkly to me. Be humble. Always keep learning. Look for opportunities to learn. And if someone in your world recognizes that you don't know something yet, or you're not good at something yet, you've got a variety of ways that you can take that. You can take that as a deep personal insult. How dare you say I'm not good at this? You can take that as some sort of personal attack. Oh my God, I'm being attacked. You can take that as a moment of help. Wow, that person took the time to say, you know what, you're still growing here. And it's important for you to recognize you're still growing here. And that's fine. We're all still growing, and I support you. And I talked on LinkedIn today about how grateful I was to someone who messaged me not quite a year ago when I was in my grumpy period. I don't know if anyone remembers, but while I was writing my book, I was in a bit of a grumpy period because I saw all of these problems with UX that I wanted to desperately fix, and every day was more BS. And when I would get on LinkedIn, I tended to take it out on people, which is not who I want to be. And I had a complete stranger write to me and say, I saw a bunch of things you wrote on LinkedIn and it kind of made me dislike you. You came off very negative. But then I saw you as a podcast guest and you're caring and you're smart and you care about UX and you care about people, but that's not how you came across on LinkedIn. Now, I could have had a whole bunch of responses to that stranger. I could have been like, F you, lady, get out of my stuff. I know me. I know me and I'm just fine. We all know that person, right? I could have said, up yours, or I could have said, what does a normal ego person say? Oh, yeah, well, you're not perfect. You always can recognize someone who's struggling a bit with humility or ego when they feel they're being attacked and turned it onto you. Oh, yeah, well, you're not that good. Oh, yeah, well, maybe you're not much of a good I bet there are times you don't communicate well. This tactic doesn't work in our romantic relationships. This tactic doesn't work at work, and it doesn't work on LinkedIn. So it's important to recognize the different ways where ego and humility are places where we all could improve. No one is perfect. I like to think I'm better than last year, but there's always room for improvement. And keep looking for this in yourself. I forgot to look at the chat room. Nobody said anything. We got 8 people watching. Come on, people, say something. So these were, let me see, I had one more note that I had written down. Oh, yeah, number 10. Okay, number 10, and then we're bringing in our special guest. This one I got from the super genius Prasad, who is part of UXreactor.com, which is extremely interesting. Basically, he kind of teaches people UX and then turns them into apprentices at his company and then places them at famous companies. And he's got a really interesting system. And I was lucky to meet him in person in February. So Prasad has a way that he tries to gauge who is going to be a future UX star. And that way, before he even allows people into his program and allows them into his apprenticeship, he's tried to assess and predict if they're likely to have a long term excellent career. And he found that one of the key traits that people needed to have that really made or broke their UX career was resilience. Hey Oz, good to see you in the YouTube channel. Resilience. And I want to talk about that in a minute, and then I promise we'll bring in our guest. Um, Resilience. So, what would be the definition of resilience? Well, I think about that as what's your reaction when things go wrong? What happens when you don't get what you were hoping to get? What happens when an outcome goes badly? What happens when you get news you don't like? This is where resilience is important. This is where you have to. Now, not everything's going to roll off you right away, and that's okay. But I try to be the person who is upset about that for 30 minutes and then gets over it and moves on. But I find if you are someone who holds a grudge, to me that's a sign of not resilience. Now that doesn't mean I think you're a bad person or evil or doing something wrong. It just means you've got more to work on in resilience. And I also, and I'll ask my guest what he thinks of these and if he can think of more examples of resilience. But I also, so I'm warming him up there. But I also think resilience has, if you've worked in UX more than about 10 minutes, you've had your ideas shot down. You've had your ideas shot down, dismissed, overruled, circumvented, manipulated, not done. Sometimes it's been a more personal attack. Well, you're probably not good at this. You're just going to sketch screens. You cannot run in a corner and cry. I know in your first year of work you're going to want to run in a corner and cry, but we have to be resilient. Now, that doesn't mean we put up with bull, and that doesn't mean we like it. And we certainly don't want to become the aggressor, but it means we must find ways to have that thicker skin. I always used to hear that growing up outside of New York City. Thicker skin. You need a thicker skin. I tell you, you grow up outside of a main city or inside of a main city in America, you probably have a pretty thick skin. Especially if you were bullied. Those of us who were bullied, we realized if you were bullied, like I was, my special guest is nodding. Many of us were bullied, and we decided at some point, either we let this break us, or we can't make this part of our fabric. We'll hear what the people say. We'll take in anything that doesn't sound like bull, and the rest of it has to go and pass through us like so much poop. And so I think that if you've been in that situation, you're a little more familiar with resilience. Some people will say grit. There's a lot of words for it. But when I think about what we need as UX practitioners, and I credit Prasad K, I don't remember his last name, Prasad K from UXreactor.com, he really hit it on the head with resilience, especially when I see some people fighting on LinkedIn and the fight's not going very well for one person. Maybe their ideas started to look a little bit weak and it falls apart. Out come the personal insults, out come the bull, out come the, everybody agrees with me and who are you? That you need resilience and it's something to continue developing. So, thanks to the 8 people who've been watching so far, this concludes the Debbie Talks Her Head Off portion and talks about the 10 traits that I think every UX practitioner must have. And with that, I'm going to unmute a special friend and bring in the always well loved Darren Hood. He's back, everybody. We can't get rid of him. Uh, ah! And as usual, he always repping Detroit. You're wearing your Detroit hat, your Detroit shirt. That's it. Detroit underwear. Yeah, whole thing. So, so Darren, we secretly agreed we would bring you in at this point because this ties into some of the things you're always talking about with emotional
Yes.
intelligence. And you've been on the podcast before talking about emotional intelligence, and I remember we left feeling like unfinished, unfinished. There was more to say. So, today I'm going to mostly shut up and mostly let you talk about the things you wanted to talk about. People in the chat room, I'm watching the chat room. If you have comments or questions on what I've said or what Darren's saying, let it out there and I'll let him know. By the way, Darren, there's a little speech bubble in the interface that you're using with this, and I can back channel you. Um, just so you know, there's a secret back channel. Louis is
Okay.
here, and he says, "Ooh-hoo!" I guess he's happy to see you.
Louis.
Louis and
Louis.
Peter Diaz over in LinkedIn has posted a smiley face, so I think people are happy to see you. So
There
Darren,
we go.
just go for what you were going to say, and since I'm being your show producer today, let me know when you want slide 1 and slide 2.
Sure thing. Sure thing. Thanks, Debbie, for having me. Again, hello, everybody. And I'm going to segue as Debbie was asking. And I love the list. Let's say that first. And a lot of the things that are mentioned in Debbie's list are also in a talk that I did. I've delivered the talk 3 times, and it's called The Need for Emotional Intelligence in UX. And so, of course, when you look at emotional intelligence, there's always the standard list of most of the famous authors have 4. And then there's Adele Lynn, who is my favorite, has 5. I'm not even going to mention those 5. What I'm going to do is that in that talk, I built upon that. So I'm going to just run through the list that I have that's parallel with what Debbie was talking about, and you'll see the overlap. We mentioned some of the same things. Sometimes it's just a matter of semantics, but I'll mention these and I'll try not to stay on these because when these are done, I'm actually going to do something that a person who came on the podcast and submitted a request for, asked for some time ago, at least a couple months ago, about red flags associated with EQ. So we're gonna there today. So here's my list that's in parallel with what Debbie was talking about. The first one, and I call these overlooked emotional intelligence traits, and that's what I would call what Debbie was talking about. Those are all of them are critical for emotional intelligence. And for those that don't know, emotional intelligence is basically about how you carry yourself, how you're functioning mentally, how self-aware you are. In short, that's what it's about. And it's a critical aspect of UX. You can have the best wireframes and the best prototype in the world, but you will not be able to accomplish what you think you might accomplish if you lack when it comes to EQ.
Do you want your
So I'm going
first
to echo
slide?
one. I want to echo what? Sorry?
Do you want your first slide up about what emotional intelligence
No,
is?
not yet.
Oh, not yet.
Not yet.
So sneaky.
Not
Okay.
yet. So it's critical that we have these EQ traits in place. And I want to echo something else that Debbie mentioned because this is critical. And sometimes when you're interacting with passionate people like Debbie and myself, some people see the passion and they take the passion for something that it's not. So I want to make sure I say this up front. These things are not being said to take you and throw the baby out with the bathwater. When I get into the red flags portion of it, I want you to be aware that if something that I mentioned is something that you see in yourself or in someone else, you always have the opportunity to get better, and you always have the opportunity to meet the challenge to improve or manage your relationship, even if you have to manage up when you see that someone you're interacting with has the EQ red flags. But so I'm going to say that because I know I'm going to forget it later. So here's the list of overlooked emotional intelligence traits. Then we'll flip over to the EQ red flags. Overlooked trait number 1, that a UX professional will help you in your career, help you in executing your office, whatever your title is as a UX professional. Number 1, curiosity. And I define this as an innate tendency to delve into what one does not know. This is one of the things that helps us to ask the question, why? And sometimes how. When you see what a business goal is, or when you see what we're trying to accomplish in a particular project, or what value proposal we have with the solution, Ask questions, find out what's going on, and that's something that's going to help us to drive and bring more value with regard to the UX work that we do. Overlooked trait number 2 is idealism, the willingness to engage in speculation. And Debbie talked about this, just use a different word, to help establish new boundaries. Try to look beyond where you are. Don't settle for where you are. Innovation is dependent upon engaging with somebody who has an idealistic mindset. So don't be afraid to be ahead of the curve, and don't be afraid to push the envelope and let somebody else tell you what the constraints are with the work that we're doing. So that's another one. That's number 2. Pragmatism. This is the focus on being practical and maintaining a commitment to what actually works. So it brings a sense
Oop, I don't know if you guys are
of ourselves
seeing
grounded.
this.
So
Oh, sorry, Darren, you blipped. Can you repeat your last sentence?
sure, we just want to make sure that we push the envelope, but we want to maintain a sense of realism. We want to make sure we understand what it actually is possible, and make sure that we keep ourselves grounded within that. Let's not be unrealistic in what we're going after in our UX efforts. The next one, adaptability. And I think Debbie mentioned one that is akin to this too. Again, semantics. But adaptability I define as morphing, the ability to morph in accordance with conditions, circumstances, and requirements so that you foster optimal attitude and performance. So this is a personality trait. We're talking about you being adaptable. We're talking about me being adaptable. Don't be so rigid that nobody can deal with you. You can't deal with anybody else. You can't make any progress with the work because you're being too rigid. It must be my way or the highway. That's not being adaptable, and it detracts from what you're trying to accomplish from a UX perspective. Next one, this is going to sound familiar, resilience. Da, 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 da. The ability to rebound quickly from disappointment, distractions, or uncomfortable factors, being committed to progress no matter what you're facing. That's
So
how
give
I
me some
define it.
examples. Give me some examples.
Oh man, the time that you wanted to do research and the stakeholders would not, and the company would not allow you to do research even though you needed to validate design direction, and you need to confirm whether or not something works before it gets delivered. Instead, we want you to get this thing out. Get this
That
thing out there.
That's a accidentally perfect example because when I interviewed someone for my book who was in marketing, she said, "Oh, sometimes the UX people I've worked with, they wanted to do all this research and all this design and cycle, and they couldn't get the time and budget to do it, and they acted like, 'Screw you guys, I'm going home.'" And I was like, "Oh, you had a bunch of crappy UX designers. What's with that? I will always make the most of whatever time and budget you give me." But she said they acted inflexibly, and so maybe flexibility
Yes.
is part of resilience.
Yep. And another reason that, just to sort of highlight again the importance of emotional intelligence, when we say EQ, that's short for emotional quotient, but it's talking about the same thing. That is just so critical because you might be working on a project with somebody now. But what about the project that you're going to be working on with them 8 months from now, a year from now? And I always tell people how important it is to make sure that you're not just delivering some wireframes or some personas or what research or whatever it might be. You're trying to make sure that you're representing UX in a proper light, that you're making sure to bring value, and that you're making sure to manage relationships because you're going to be dealing with with these people potentially on a regular basis with regular cycles. And not only do you have to make sure that that relationship is solid, but you have to make sure that all stakeholders' perceptions of what it is to engage with UX and to work with a UX team, as well as you individually, that all of those stay intact. So these are the types of things that get missed in a lot of the UX work that's being done out there today, and why I tend to really be so passionate and taking a stance about some of the things I see, because this type of fiber, if you will, is being destroyed. It's eroding in a lot of circles. People, I have heard conversations. I know people who have conducted surveys, and people don't deal with the UX person or the UX team. And when you really look at the why, it always boils down to not because of the deliverables, not because of the artifacts, but because of something related to emotional intelligence.
They're
It's
artsy
the thing that,
fartsy hipsters.
yeah. So we want to do more than that. I'm gonna leave off the rest of this list.
And we
I'm
do have
gonna
a
end on
question. We do
resilience.
have we
Yes.
have a question in the chat room. So let me know when you want me to throw you that.
You know what? Go ahead and throw it to me now, and then we'll get to the. I'm gonna move over to the EQ red flags. So I'm gonna leave that list alone and move over to slide 2 that I gave you,
Okay.
the 9, and we'll go ahead and take the question now.
Okay, so Oz, my good friend Oz, says, I wonder about
Yes.
pragmatism and idealism. Those seem like personality types. I've seen some really successful duos where one person's more practical, the other's more pragmatic, and they balance each other. I meant one person's pragmatic and maybe the other's the idealist. Some people just don't have the creativity to be an idealist, but are they willing to work with an idealist? So I guess a good question here is, of these lists that we're throwing out there, does everybody have to be all of them, or can you be some of them and try to find that partner who balances you?
I think that's a great question that Oz presents, as well as a great point. From the perspective of trying to get everybody to, we're doing two things in general. I want to look at myself, each person to look at themselves as a UX professional, and then you're examining these things and sort of putting them in your hip pocket when it comes to evaluating your peers. So for me, I am striving to be pragmatic, and I also want to make sure. I mean, I want to do both. I want to make sure, and I want to bring them back up here so I make sure that I address this properly. The issue of being an idealist. There's a time to be an idealist when I'm working on a project, and while I'm being an idealist and pushing those boundaries, I'm also looking for input and also trying to police myself to make sure that I'm also being pragmatic. So, as the individual who's working on the project, I am striving to manifest both when they are applicable, when they are in the best interest, and when they bring value. I
I would
can't be the UX person. I can't be one or the other. Now, we may be on different levels of getting to the point where we can manage that or demonstrate that duality between the two, but it's something that we strive for over
And I
time.
would, and by the way, I don't know if you have the chat thing open. I back channeled you the next question. Click the little, is there a
So,
little chat bubble button on your interface?
I see it. There it is. All
Okay, good.
right. Yeah.
So we can back channel each other there. So before we get to that question, my thought for Oz is I think when you work on it with a partner or something like that, then there's always room for balance. But so many of us in UX tend to be the solitary only UX worker on a project. And
Yeah.
so I don't necessarily get the opportunity to say, and here's my detective partner, so and so, and they've got these traits I don't have. It's fortunately or unfortunately, many of us work as the only UX person assigned to the project, and so while it's not
Yes.
mandatory that we have overflowing buckets of all of these traits, it's probably better if we have some pragmatism and some idealism and can apply that to these projects. So it's more about what's great for a UX practitioner to have and improve versus what should an entire team eventually all have when we put multiple people together. Quick hello to Lakeisha, who says, "Good morning. This is great information." Good morning, Lakeisha. And now we've got a question from John that I'm going to interrupt you with. And John
Okay.
says, What are key challenges UX practitioners need to overcome as remote collaborators and facilitators of the design process? So I feel like this question isn't totally relevant because it's not completely about traits and personal qualities, but perhaps we can tie it back in and say, are there any traits or personal qualities that you feel maybe helps a UX practitioner in a remote scenario?
Two come to mind when I read that question: patience, which is something else that goes way under the radar, and you never hear anybody talk about how patience benefits us and the need to exercise patience as a UX professional. Tie that in, being excellent when it comes to interpersonal communication, with listening being the, of course, communication. When people say we need to communicate, they're usually talking about how we talk to one another. They're never talking about the listening. And there's an old little sort of quick quip that I came up with years ago, and it comes to mind again now. Our ears, I would always say that our ears are above our mouth for a reason, and our brains above both. So let's proceed in a vertical manner. And when we do that, we actually will process what people say. We'll be able to respond in a way that confirms. This is old school listening skill stuff. Um, Process it in a way where we confirm that we have heard them properly, because part of being a UX professional is conveying to people and making sure that they understand that you have heard them. If the work that you provide, I always say that there are subtitles beneath what everybody says and does. If the subtitles in your actions say that you have not been listening, you're not going to get very far with them. And you begin to sell yourself down the river, and it makes it difficult for you to execute the UX position because you haven't demonstrated it. Didn't say that you didn't hear, you didn't demonstrate it. So when we make sure that we're patient in this online collaboration. I love the progressive commercial when they're trying to have the commercial on Zoom or whatever, and everybody's talking over each other and all kind of crazy things are going on. But and I don't know if anyone's ever seen, I remember what it's called, but there's an old example of people behaving as if they're in a conference call, but they're doing it in person. If you ever see it on YouTube, it is absolutely hilarious. And if you take that and engineer it, you can identify what some of those potential pitfalls are. So if we're patient as we're collaborating remote, especially today as we're dealing with the whole COVID, the pandemic, that if we make sure to be patient, make sure to exhibit the absolute just strive. And yes, you're going to grow. You're not going to ace it straight out the box. Nobody does, nobody has. And even those of us that have been doing this for a long time, we're all still trying to grow and get better at different things. Make sure to be patient, exercise patience, let people even get their frustrations out. That's one of the biggest things that UXers don't like. They don't like it when people express their frustration about what it is that's being done. Let them voice their frustration. Welcome it. Never try to suppress somebody's passion, whether you agree with it or whether you like it or not. Never try to suppress it. Let them have it out. And eventually you'll find out it's not as bad as you thought. And you'll find out that person's passion is value for your team, especially amongst your stakeholders.
I just want to sing "Eye of the Tiger" behind you. What I wanted to add to that is from a slide that I give in a lot of talks, which is the number one thing I think many UX people can do to improve collaboration is to show the empathy and humility that we want to show towards our customers, to our coworkers. That we get so wrapped up in
Yes.
let's have empathy for our customers, 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 customers. What are their needs? And we don't bother to figure out the needs of our coworkers and collaborators. So, what type of
Yep.
relationship is the product manager looking to have with us? Don't guess, don't silo yourself. It's time to find out. Who in engineering can we talk to at the beginning of the project? And it's so many steps throughout the project. Don't guess. Let's find out. And so I remind people to use that empathy and your humility to not assume what other people need from you or guess or whatever, and to deliberately architect relationships with the people on your team based on what you need from them and what they need from you. Just like you want to satisfy customers' needs, we've got to satisfy our teammates as well. We're not always going to be aligned, we're not always going to agree, but at least we can put in some effort to try to figure out what our boundaries are, since some roles feel like they overlap sometimes, and what people need and when. So I think use your humility and your empathy, architect relationships deliberately. And with
Yep,
that,
another great. Yep, another great part of emotional intelligence. It is.
do you want me to go to
That's
red
another.
flags?
Yeah, let's go to red flags.
All
Yes.
right.
And what you guys are about to see is this is also part of the talk. And anyone who's interested, you can actually get this deck off of SlideShare, where you can see all the deck. You won't think about delivering again on my YouTube channel that's coming up soon. Just delivering the talk so people don't have to fill in the gaps. How about I just do it? So we're going to do this again, and I will talk about everything here. But one of the slides, it talks about the stereotypical things that are believed about emotional intelligence. Then it talks about the additions, like some of the ones that I just talked about, the overlooked aspects of emotional intelligence, and then the red flags. If you see these in yourself, I'm going to run them off and then I'll talk about them. But as you see these in yourself, then you know you have work to do. Don't deny, which is one of them here, denial. Don't deny that it's there. Face it, work on it. If you don't face it and work on it, you will not overcome it. It's that simple. If you see it in someone else, then you need to establish strategies to manage it and overcome it with them. And there's different ways to go with that. But my goal today is to simply get these on everybody's radar. We won't have time to address them all individually. And as someone requested a while back, we're going to do a separate talk just on these alone. The first one is being, well, I'm sorry, let me read them all off again. Hypercritical, fear, detrimental ambition, denial, deflection, stubbornness, trolling, inferiority, or incivility. These are all basically enemies of emotional intelligence. If you see these in you or in someone else, there's work to be done. And I will hope that somebody would be willing to embrace the work. If this is present and there's no work being done, the result is going to be dysfunction, toxicity, and hostility. That's because these are really, really, really critical, because nobody wants to be exposed to these things at all. Nobody does. If you want to see a funny survey, ask anybody if they want to engage with any of these things and have these facets or these factors demonstrated toward them. Nobody does. So hypercritical, what is that? When people are, it's one thing to be critical, and critical is not the bad thing. People talk about, oh, well, stop being so critical. Well, there's people always talk about constructive criticism, but nobody ever talks about destructive criticism. Constructive criticism identifies what's good. It's about a build. Destructive criticism is what we're getting at when we talk about being hypercritical. Destructive criticism just gets something or someone in his crosshairs and just goes for it. And they're just launching out anything, but there's no heart, the whole empathy factor. You don't care about the person developing. You don't care about the project getting better. You don't care about building. It's just having something contrary to say. A little known word that comes into play, we don't hear it anywhere in the world too much anymore, but there's a word called variance. It's always something person. The people that just are always bringing something up, they're going to criticize any and everything. Movie critics get blamed for being hypercritical at times. It's the same type of thing. They watch a movie, they don't like it, they got a bug up their butt, so they just start criticizing things. This is a sign that there's something else that's wrong. If there's something that's truly wrong, it doesn't have to be presented in a hypercritical fashion. It just needs to be presented so the people who hear it can do something about what's being said. But don't allow yourself to be the person who's criticizing just for the sake of criticizing. That doesn't help anyone. Fear. And I like to say that fear is really anxiety that stems from the unknown. If you don't know, if you're traveling down a road and there's a lot of fog and you don't know what's ahead of you, we naturally become fearful. And that is a good way to help people understand that anytime there's something we don't know how things are going to turn out, we don't know what's up ahead, we don't know what's going to happen, the natural response is fear. So, but when I'm not talking about that type of fear. I'm talking about fear that is really, might want to say that this is paranoia in a sense. When people are afraid and they have no reason to be afraid. When people are afraid because they have chosen not to process the information to them and they have opted for fear. This is a problem. We don't know how to stay respond. Oh my God, what are we going to do? And the next thing you know, you start to put together design solutions and making recommendations based on your fear instead of embracing critical thinking and proceeding in a constructive fashion. So if you see fear or fear manifests in someone else, there's some management that needs to be done, either in you or in someone else. Detrimental ambition. This is a big one, and people don't usually word it this way, but I did. It's just what I do, I guess. But when you have ambition, but that ambition is accomplished at the expense of someone else, that's what I mean by detrimental ambition. It doesn't make sense to try to get ahead at someone else's expense. Don't step on other people to get ahead. Don't put someone else down in hopes that that helps you to get up. That's detrimental.
That one
Denial.
happened recently.
That one it's a mess. Denial. If you see something, if you see a spade, it's a spade. If the sky is blue, it's blue. If you need to wear a mask, wear a mask. But denial is something that a lot of people operate in, and it's dangerous. But again, I associate this with a lack of emotional intelligence. That means that there's self-awareness is not being handled properly. You're not understanding your surroundings the proper way. We don't want to do that. Process what you see. It takes courage to not be in denial, because some of the things that we see, they're not comfortable. They're not pleasant. There's nothing welcoming about it. There's nothing comforting about it. But if we face it, then we're able to accomplish what we need to accomplish. The longer we deny something, the longer we prolong our success, the success we could have. Deflection. And Debbie mentioned this a couple of times. With deflection, that's the one where you don't like what's not by that term, but you gave a great example.
No, I'm
where
acting it
people
out. That was my joke.
Oh, yes. They're butting heads on LinkedIn. And then one person, instead of dealing with some of you know me, you see my posts on LinkedIn. When somebody wants to get into a point where they are no longer being, they're no longer being civil, you can't have an adult discussion, and then they want to even go lower and start talking about something that has nothing to do with the topic at hand. That's deflection. Stick with the topic. Definitely don't get personal about it, trying to deflect. You just try to shift everyone's focus away from where the focus is supposed to be. When that happens in social media, I call it hijacking. I do not allow my post. Some of you know, I actually just turned my comments back on recently because I ended up hurting cats half the time because people were deflecting all the time and doing something else that's listed here that I'll touch on in a moment. But don't deflect. Deal with the subject at hand. That's the mature way to handle it. That's the emotionally intelligent way to handle it.
Just a quick mention, I want to mention just quickly,
Yes.
we've got only 7 minutes left if we stay on time today.
Yes.
So if anybody has last comments or questions, throw them in there now so I can get them to Darren, and we'll let Darren go through his list. I'll give you guys a couple of closing notes, and we'll wrap it up. But back to you, Darren.
Yep, and I'm going to move quickly. So we won't be able to do all of these full justice. Got to get them out there. So stubbornness, that one sort of takes care of itself. The person who just refuses to move. the person who's just bullheaded. I have news for you too. People say that the old saying, "Stubborn as a mule." Would you believe me if I told you that mules are not as we suppose? It turns out that the reason that mules appear stubborn is if you try, they're actually extremely intelligent, and mules will. So this is where it comes in. Mules don't want to do something. Am I locking up there?
Yeah, you're blipping a little bit.
Okay, so I'll repeat. Mules are not as stubborn as people think they are. Did that come through?
It did. In general, my system will slow down your video and maintain your audio. So go ahead.
Gotcha. Okay. Mules, if they know that you're trying to get them to do something that is not in their best interest, that's when the supposed stubbornness comes out. So when someone says that a mule is stubborn, they usually are just trying to say that a mule is being stubborn blindly. True mule stubbornness is when somebody knows something. Let's take this to the human factor now. If a person knows something and what you're trying to get them to do, the direction you're trying to get them to go, is it violates what they know, but they don't know what you're talking about, then they will actually become resistant, but it's due to the unfamiliarity with what you're talking about. Their expertise doesn't take them that far. So stubbornness, that shows a lack of emotional intelligence. Instead of being stubborn, ask somebody to help you understand. Make sure that you're an understanding person. Make sure that you seek to see what it is that someone is recommending or the direction that we're going, so you can say yay or say nay, but be informed instead of just drawing conclusions, making assumptions. That's more mulish or true stubbornness, if you will. Akin to deflection, we have trolling. Those people that follow you around on social media, and this one is specifically, it manifests itself in the world of social media. These are the people who just go around trying to pick fights. I had someone once who went and they looked at the things that I posted, and this is a more extreme example of trolling, but they looked at the things I posted, took them, reordered the words, tried to get people to think that I was saying something else, and then went off and made some money off of it. Then they come back into your post later, and then they hijack and they do things just to keep a stir. That's what trolling basically is. It's if you will. That's a sign that emotional intelligence is not there. And I've seen very few people. I have seen some trolls overcome their trolling. I've seen some trolls overcome it only to return to it 6 months later. Most of the people I've seen troll never overcome it. So this is one of those that is good for you to recognize it, because engaging with a troll does not benefit you, nor does it benefit them most of the time. And it's just a sad truth that we need to know and understand. When you recognize a trolling characteristics, it's good to just back off, take the high road, back off. And if they're going to overcome it, they're not going to overcome it on my time, because I have 5,000 other things to do. So, but just recognize it and don't allow yourself to be a troll. Inferiority complexes, automatically assuming that you are less than anyone, and being threatened because of what someone else brings to the table. If you're threatened because of someone else's skill and knowledge, there's some issues. You got to overcome that. So we want to get over that quickly. We want to get over it in a constructive manner, and we want to be patient with ourselves while we do it. But there's no reason to have an inferiority complex. And some people even go as far as attacking the person that they feel that they're inferior to, which is a huge sign of an EQ problem. And lastly, which is akin to that one, incivility. If you allow yourself to lower yourself to the point where you do not treat others with dignity and respect, mutual professional respect, that's a huge sign that there's an EQ problem. We should never be incivil one to another. We should be courteous. We should be patient. We should appreciate one another. We should extend common courtesy to one another. And little bit known, that is part of being strong from an emotionally intelligent perspective. And that is the list of EQ red flags.
Hooray! Thank you, Darren. No other questions have come in other than you are being thrown love from Jonathan Bowman. He's like, I
Hey,
love
Jonathan.
Darren. Love him. You got some bro love from Jonathan Bowman, who left a comment on one of my things either yesterday or today that was like fantabulous. So good to see you
Yeah,
here.
Jonathan's
Thanks for
sharp as a
coming
tack.
by. Yeah, so good to see you. Thanks for coming by. And if you guys have any more questions, now's your time to write them. I'm going to take a moment and just do a little bit of reminders of what's coming up here. So I wrote a post this morning on LinkedIn. I'm going to just tell you this is the last podcast of May. Starting in June, everything will be starting at the half hour. I find a lot of people are starting their stuff on the hour when I do, and then it's like, oh no, who do I watch? And everyone's fighting. So I'm going to shift mine to start a half hour in, so that way you can watch a half hour of somebody else and then join me. So we'll see how that works. So mark your calendars for what will be 6:30 p.m. Italy time. And on June 1st, I'm going to be doing collaboration versus design by committee versus democratization. What are these? What's the difference? And which of these do we want? June 3rd, we have special guest Tatawan Suto, who's going to be talking to us about what is learning and instructional design. How is it different from what we do? June 10th, I am very proud to welcome Dr. Nick Fine to the show for the first time. He's going to be talking about is UX a mindset? Is UX a state of mind? June 11th, I'm going to be doing Design Sprints Are Devolving and Bad for UX. And June 15th, special guest Joel Barr is going to talk about UX job interview challenges. You know how when you are interviewing and magically they want you to whiteboard or take some homework home so we're going to be talking about some of our horror stories with that and some of our opinions and advice on should you do these and how and when and what and all that. So that is kind of the next 2 weeks coming up in the Delta CX podcast universe. Once again, please remember to subscribe on YouTube and click that bell so you know when we're live. And want to thank everybody. I made it to 400 subscribers this month. I was hoping for 500, but that's just a vanity metric. So we can all appease my vanity in June. But red flag, red flag. So thanks again to Darren and for everybody who joined in the chat today. And Chris Wadhamlin says, thank you, Darren and Debbie. Appreciate the perspective. Thank you, Chris, for joining in. And I don't know if your name is pronounced Aline. I would say Aline because I'm in Italy. Aline says, this was great. Thank you. Nasib says, thanks to both of you. It was a great talk. Thanks to everybody for the wonderful feedback and the good questions. And I'm going to sing us out now with our closing video. And Darren, thanks again. And let's come up with another reason to do a podcast together.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.